concepts that have been sort of the foundation of the development and implementation of the Winnipeg Plan to End Youth Homelessness. And I'm going to let Denisa sort of talk about the spark and how the plan came to be.
So knowing what we know about the landscape in Winnipeg, there really was a spark in the community. There was the End Homelessness Plan for Winnipeg, but what youth practitioner or youth-focused agencies really saw in that plan was that there weren't any specific youth focuses, youth strategies. It didn't take into consideration the causes of youth homelessness, which is very distinct. So there was a spark in the community that there needed to be an action taken and a youth plan needed to be created. So based on the principles of reconciliation and a deep understanding of the structural and systemic causes of youth homelessness in Winnipeg, dozens of youth-serving agencies formed a coalition to develop a concrete and actionable strategy to address youth homelessness. The coalition was represented by Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth-serving agencies, government representatives, and most importantly, youth representatives. So it really was a collaborative effort. It really was a grassroots effort in the need to create a youth-focused strategy where youth are at the center of that strategy, where youth with lived experience can say, these are the strategies that will work. So we had a lot of involvement. About 100 youth with lived experience participated in the development of the plan. And in the community engagement process, there's over 200 community and government stakeholders representing 70 different agencies, departments, associations that participated in creating the plan. We named it Here and Now because we deeply believe that the place is here and the time is now for action to end and prevent youth homelessness. The process of developing the plan was designed to listen to the voices of youth, understand how youth voices can be incorporated throughout the services for youth experiencing or at risk of homelessness, identify potential solutions to causes of youth homelessness, and the opportunities to coordinate pathways into it. And very, very importantly, understand present-day relationships between colonialism, youth homelessness, and identify decolonizing strategies based in Indigenous worldviews. And the plan was launched in October of 2016, so it's fairly new, but we're working hard to implement the plan as we move forward. As well as building consensus on principles and values that are foundational for these solutions to be implemented in Winnipeg, and to mobilize all sectors towards preventing and ending youth homelessness, because everyone has a role to play in ending youth homelessness. It's not just at a systems level, but it's the private sector, it's the public sector, it's youth. It's all coming together under one vision, under this plan, to end and prevent youth homelessness. So we're very excited to be moving forward. We have a great plan, we have a great focus, and those, the logos there are just the agencies that are working with us on the steering committee in implementing the plan. What we heard from the community and what we heard from youth and what we heard from Indigenous leaders is that we really need to focus on 4 key pillars: access, prevention, housing and supports to thrive, to really make a difference and prevent and end youth homelessness. So when we look at access, what does that mean? Youth have immediate access to supports needed to prevent, alleviate, and respond to homelessness. And under each of these 4 pillars, there's priorities and there's action items. For example, under access, priority is to develop a network of hubs that are open 24/7 by increasing the capacity of youth-serving agencies. Prevention, we look at youth and families struggling with risk factors of homelessness. They're identified and they're supported. Our priority is to create an interdepartmental zero discharge into homelessness, starting with a coordinated provincial policy direction that supports youth transitioning from any type of provincial government or government-funded care, be it CFS care, correctional institutions. So a zero discharge into homelessness, where there is a plan for them once they exit. There is supports for them. There is housing. There is opportunities for education, so that they're not left with, say, a bag in their hand and a couple $100 in their pockets, that they are successful and they can thrive in transition. And also supports to thrive. Youth with experience of homelessness have the supports they need to maintain housing and to thrive. So priority under that pillar is to encourage employment income assistance to increase the stability of income supports for youth. So what we're working towards and the values that guide us to move forward is to creating greater equality between both populations, working together to create opportunities and to reduce barriers, and moving beyond the past and away from a dependency on government. So reconciliation efforts to reduce barriers and increase communication in the youth homelessness sector will provide equitable access to social services. So what are we recognizing as we move forward in addressing reconciliation? A recognition that culture is a way of life. A recognition that cultural competency is a starting point for all service providers. And a recognition that healing from trauma is critical. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. So just, when we talk about those pieces, I think it's just really important, and this is something that we've worked on really hard in Winnipeg, is creating a shared understanding. We have a lot of Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations that have found common working ground. And it's not unusual for us to work in collaboration. A number of years ago, we created the Sexually Exploited Youth Community Coalition, which led to the provincial strategy on sexual exploitation. And we're doing the same thing with the End Homelessness. And so for us to be able to do that, it's really important that, community groups understand the history of Indigenous people in a way that they can then really engage in reconciliation in a meaningful way. For us, that really means the biggest challenge that we have sometimes is, when it comes to Indigenous and non-Indigenous, for Indigenous organizations, we're grounded in our culture, in our understanding. We are culturally safe, we're culturally competent. So when we think about non-Indigenous organizations and you're working with young people, like I said, in Winnipeg, we have a high Indigenous population, so it makes sense for us to work in that way. For non-Indigenous organizations, it really is about cultural competency. And it's about creating cultural safety, and that is beyond. I think there was can't remember what I said. It's beyond hanging a dream catcher in your window and calling yourself culturally safe. That's not what it's about. It is about understanding history and understanding where these young people come from. It's about creating meaningful engagement opportunities. There is a story I was sharing with Denise over lunch. We talked about partnerships and engagement and what it means to engage with Indigenous communities. And I had met with this, myself and another Indigenous leader in the community met with a non-Indigenous organization, and who I won't name, but our meeting really was this individually sharing with us their perspectives and how they work. And so we listened respectfully, and we wanted to engage with this individual. And we wanted to share with them our perspectives and our knowledge and how we work with kids, because it was very different. They were very rule-based, we're very value-based. But when it came to our turn to talk, he had to rush off. And we're like, okay, well, let's reschedule a meeting. He's like, yeah. And we never did get a rescheduled meeting, but we did hear further down the line that he had been going around saying, well, I consulted with the Indigenous community. Yeah, what I'm doing is good. And we were like, what? So it is really important to be engaged in a true way. And part of that is, even with the development of the Winnipeg Plan, when it was first developed, it was a non-Indigenous organization. Some of you may know her, Kelly Holmes. She's from Resource Assistant for Youth. She's the one that kind of got it going. She had a conversation. She was phoning up all of us saying, hey, we have this issue. The 10-year plan of Winnipeg's homelessness didn't address youth at all. And so she was really kind of, that's not okay, and we need a plan, let's get together. So we all got together, as we do, and basically what developed was this plan. But over time, there was acknowledgement through conversation that maybe it would make more sense for the plan to be nested in Indigenous organizations. So that is why I'm here because the Winnipeg plan is now hosted and nested within Nadinaway-Maganandwad, which is, important for us when it comes to leadership of Indigenous people and really, again, creating those meaningful opportunities. And sometimes that's hard for people. It's hard, especially for non-Indigenous organizations, to take a step back and sort of let go of the control that historically they've maintained. But for us, that very much is part of the process of moving forward.
So we wanted to leave you some promising practices in Winnipeg and what the kind of programs that are in Winnipeg. There's many more promising practices. If you go to our website, www.hereandnowwinnipeg.ca, you'll find the full version of the plan as well as the executive version. And under each of the pillars, promising practices in those pillars: access, prevention, housing and supports to thrive. So with Nadinaway, they have a youth safe space that's open 24/7. They have a second stage, which is transitional housing, youth resource center, as well as employment and EIA access. It really is a youth hub in the North End. And Mamaway, they have family conferencing. The model is an Indigenous-based, an Indigenous-led process to helping youth who transition out of CFS care into the community. And they've recently got funding for that, and they're off to a fantastic, wonderful start. So yeah, did you want anything? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for coming. So my name is Shelby Seabrook. I'm a housing-based case manager with Operation Come Home. And I'm here with my coworker Dominique Murphy, who is also a housing support worker at Operation Come Home. And we're just here to talk about our approach on housing. So it's probably sounds familiar. I know a lot of you have been in a lot of housing programs this afternoon and this morning, but we'll do our best not to sound a little bit repetitive. But really what we're going to talk about is how we have a tiered approach at housing. So we have 3 levels of housing that we use, and we'll describe what that looks like. So just like I was saying, so we'll provide a brief overview of who we are and what we do. We are Ottawa-based, and I know some of you aren't from here. And then we'll talk about why we feel as if our tiered housing program does work and is successful, and talk about some of our experiences and some of our next steps.
Okay, good. I can hear myself, so that's positive. So like Shelby said, we are Ottawa-based. We're actually in the heart of Centertown, just over on Gloucester Street. So we primarily serve at-risk and homeless youth in the age range 16 to 29. Age ranges for different programs will vary, but that's the general age range. Just a few quick stats for you guys. Our morning drop-in program in 2017 saw 6,648 visits, which was 635 unique clients. Through one of our housing support programs, which we'll talk a little bit more about in depth later in the presentation, General Housing Assistance, that program supported 253 unique clients in 2017. Our Housing Works program supported 13 youth in accessing and maintaining housing in 2017, as well provided shorter-term support to an additional 11 youth. And then our Housing-Based Case Management program, or HBCM, supported 25 youth in 2017. So just a really quick overview of some of our programs and services. The program that started it all is Reunite, which is what it sounds like. It aims to reunite youth to either their families or a safe place, whether it's a family member, a longtime friend, anything like that, as long as it's permanent, stable, and safe. across Canada, sorry about that. So it is a partnership, I believe, with Greyhound. So we do an intake for that. It was our founding program. We do an intake. We make sure that where they're being sent to is safe, and then we reunite them. We also have a morning drop-in program, and that supports youth ages 16 up until their 26th birthday. We do a hot breakfast, bag lunches they can take with them every day as well, unlimited provision of resources and referrals to anyone that walks through the door. We also have, naturally, we have several housing support programs, which we will dive a little bit deeper into. So we have general housing assistance, housing works, and then of course housing-based case management. We do also have a few different employment support programs, one of them being the Youth Workforce Initiative, and then another one, Jobs First. And then we have a newer program called Career Works. I don't know if we have enough time to get into that, but it's pretty cool. We also have an an in-house achievement center, which is a great alternative style program for youth to gain their high school education. And then we have quite a few social enterprises as well, which main objective is to provide employment support or employment opportunities for youth.
No worries. So I won't spend too much time talking here because I know a lot of, we've been talking about this all day, but just really what makes youth unique. And there's hundreds of things that we can say here and how cool youth are and all that they bring to the table, but really, you know, why we think that they need unique services and a change of approach from the adult sector is really because their increased vulnerability, their age, their brain capacity, right? They're young people who haven't had the chance to, you know, build up some of those skills or brain development that some of the older folks may have. So maturity. And I think something really important is the cause of homelessness and really how recent their loss for maybe a home was. You know, that stuff is very fresh and kind of adds on to the piece of really prevention and intervention and how important it is for young people. So Housing First 101, so I don't know, is everyone here familiar with Housing First? Yes, everyone is shaking their head. Okay, so I won't spend much time, but we just wanted to have a little disclaimer here in case people weren't familiar, but really we do use this model and we try to, or approach, and we really try to ingrain it in the work that we do because we want to make sure we don't have preconditions, and if we do, we'll explain why later, but we really want to support people in finding housing right away and then deal with the stuff that's going on afterwards. So stabilization comes once housing's in place. So acuity, the reason we're going to talk about this as well is just because we use this as a loose term to help guide our eligibility for our program. So acuity is a term that we use in collaboration with the SPDAT. So the SPDAT is a tool that is used with Housing First, which assesses, it provides a score and provides a recommendation of support style through what that score is. So it recommends the duration, intensity, and frequency of support. So really how we use that is, so with Housing Works, General Housing Assistance, Housing Works, and HBCM, we really look at it being a mild, moderate, and high acuity support. So really acuity means the level of need that the individual requires or could benefit from. It's not set in stone, it's a loose term. We don't read too much into the word acuity or how we label someone based on their need, but it just kind of helps us guide who is eligible for which program. So what else does the SPDAT tell us? So it really just gives us an overview of some of the areas that are really important. So maybe their history of housing and homelessness, the risks, so that could be interactions with healthcare systems, police, the history of violence, self-harm, legal stuff, exploitation, socialization, wellness, so a bunch of different areas, and it gives us a score at the end. The unique thing about a TBI SPDAT that we use when at intake is, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but this is just a little bit in the beginning. It's interesting because it is self-reported, so the youth are only telling you what they feel or what they're comfortable telling you. It kind of lets you know a little bit on their insight on how they're feeling or how they view their world. So you'll often be meeting with someone and you've been working with them for some time or you know them from in the past, and they'll describe they'll score 0 on risk, and you know some of the stuff that's going on, and you know that might not be true, but that's what they're reporting, so we go with it. Yeah. So we're just going to move into now describing the programs and maybe putting more sense into what I just said. So the General Housing Assistance Program is what Dom will touch upon next.
So I'm just going to call General Housing Assistance GHA moving forward, 'cause it's a bit of a mouthful and I'm sure I'll stumble on it. So that is kind of our first tier of housing support. So it's housing assistance provided on an as-needed basis. And we do so through in-reach and outreach. And really it can range in from anything from helping find shelter space, supporting with financial literacy. Someone's never done a budget before, maybe they have secured a place. Even if it's just a friend's place, we just kind of do a little bit of budgeting, anything that they might need to know kind of financially to help them stay on track. Housing searches, housing rights and education, navigating barriers to housing, and of course the provision of various social support. So, oftentimes youth will come to us, they'll need ID, of course, classic barriers. So, we even count that as part of general housing assistance because it all contributes to their ability to access and maintain housing. Most common GHA is done in our drop-in program, but it is built into most of our other programs with the social support worker for the sake of consistency, or we try to be consistent there. General housing assistance is actually a pretty powerful tool in identifying and tracking housing and support trends. So it gives us a good idea of a lot of the clients that are coming into us, kind of what their patterns are, what their habits are, what their needs are, as well gives us a really good idea of what types of supports we're providing. So, okay, on this month we provided general housing searches for 30 youth, and then we did an additional 40 ID applications. So it really is a pretty good tool for helping us at least track what we're doing and how we're supporting people. General housing is also interesting because it really is kind of a jumping off point to see if maybe someone does need something a little bit longer term, like a housing support program. So the volume of GHA interactions with an individual client can determine the eligibility for higher levels of support. And kind of gives us an idea if we need to move someone maybe from a generalist role of support into a specialized role of support. And also acts as a really general intake or triage tool for Operation Come Home housing programs and referrals. So some of the programs or challenges that we do see with general housing assistance is that it often can be quite crisis driven, not always, but it can be, which poses its own challenges in itself when it's crisis driven. How much of the intervention are they absorbing? How much are they learning? And as such, the supports and interventions are often quite short term. We also run the risk there of a duplication of services. And then service system limitations. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on that one? The service system limitations?
I think really just comes down to the limited capacity. Things are time sensitive, and really just looking at the limited support. So as a GHA worker, you really are limited in what you can do, right? So you could be working with hundreds of youth in 1 year, and in one day you could have 30 youth walk in that door who maybe they're getting evicted, they got that notice. So it really is, there's a lot of limitations, and also within the service system. So for example, like Ontario Works or calling 301, navigating that system, there's tons of limitations that sometimes can, as someone who works in a case management point of view, I can be making those phone calls and still not get the response I need for weeks or days at a time, where when you're a generalist worker or you're working with people for a very short amount of time, that can become a little bit of a challenge to do that follow-up and get the answers you need in those time-sensitive times.
And then as well with a GHA role, there is often quite informal record keeping that can either be that can either be client-driven, so does the client have the means of hanging on to important documents that they need? More often than not, unfortunately not. And then, of course, environmental factors. Does the agency have the capacity to actually keep records of every single person that they're supporting on an individual as needed basis? So again, that kind of can be a little bit more time consuming and runs the risk of a duplication of services, or what the client is communicating to you might have kind of gone through a few different people, and maybe that's not the whole picture or even the case at all until we maybe start making some more phone calls. And again, with the GHA role, it's often a here and now expectation of support. In most housing programs, I'm sure we prefer to do a lot of a doing with, not for approach with clients. But again, when it's crisis driven and time sensitive, sometimes you do naturally just have to do for rather than with. Of course, we do with where possible, but sometimes in that limited time, you have to do for. So why does general housing assistance work? As previously mentioned, it is a fantastic initial triage tool, especially when we look into, is this person maybe going to need some longer term support? Then of course we do the SPDAT and get a better idea of the direction that they might need to go. If we've had a few interactions with the same client, we might have a little bit more context there too. That might even paint a more clear picture for us. The support is readily available. While it is often crisis-driven, the support is always there. So without having to commit to a program, if that's not an option for you, even if you know you might need a program, if you can't commit to it, at least that support is there in a generalized role until you can maybe get to somewhere that it's a more realistic option for you. Builds rapport with a wide range of with a wide range of clients. So we really do get to know, we do support pretty much all of our clients, especially in the drop-in with housing support at least once a day, or at least one time in interacting with our clients. So you really do get to know pretty much every client that walks through the door if you support them with housing even once. So that's pretty fantastic, I think. And it supports clients who might not need longer term support or who are waiting to be connected to other programs and services. It also reaches those who are already accessing OCH services and provides opportunity to reach out to those who are not. So then we'll go into our next level of housing support. It's a program called Housing Works. So it supports youth ages 16 to 19 in accessing and maintaining housing for up to 1 year. So it's a bit of a longer term program. It is very life skills focused, so there is a financial literacy program built right into it. The expectation is that they do complete at least 3 sessions of financial literacy. I personally am a little flexible on that one. I will have them do the three sessions of it, but what they want to focus on, based on what they need, is how we'll kind of approach it. So more often than not, we will do budgeting because it's an essential skill to have for housing. But as far as all the other skills go, there's safe housing searches, accessing furniture and startup, making sure that youth understand the documents that they're signing, leases, applications, things like that. Even when they get different notices from landlords, it's really making sure that they understand what it is they're reading and what it is that they might have to actually act on. Knowing what to look for when going to viewings, teaching professional communication with landlords and knowing their rights, navigating different barriers, home visits to make sure that things are in working order, and again, various social supports. There is also financial matching for last month's rent and or housing startup for up to $1,000. There is an application process for that, but it's a fantastic tool to help them get ready and successfully kind of up and running and going, whether or not they need it for rent or to get the furniture and supplies they need to live comfortably. We're happy to do that. So for eligibility,
Can I make a little?
Yes, absolutely.
So Housing Works is one of those programs where you look at it and you read that there's an eligibility criteria and you know this must not be Housing First, because there's a precondition. And we're as flexible as we can with that. So if you've recently left school or you're in an employment program to hopefully start working in anything like that, we really try to be as flexible. It's really truly just based on the funding, right, and what those requirements look like. So we are working to change that so it is a pretty flex program. But the way we look at it and the way that we internally modify that is that if someone, so general housing is really that low acuity, so, or they could be moderate or high. It's just so we aim to kind of refer them outwards. It's because it is that triage tool. But that anyone that continuously accesses that general housing more on a sporadic basis, we really look at them, and if they're low acuity, that's what it's geared towards. You know, just those in the moment things that come up and you just need some support in trying to figure it out. There's times where they get letters and really those things are so confusing, so they just need someone to kind of look at it with them and advocate for them. Whereas Housing Works just is like that one step up where you know you need your go-to person, you need someone to guide you through some stuff and really provide a little bit more case management there. So we look at that for like more moderate acuity. So it's all based on the intensity, frequency, like I mentioned earlier, that we learned from the SPDAT. So with Housing Works, you'll see, in the beginning, you'll see a more intense, more frequent support, and the goal is to phase out, right? So just wanted to quickly say that because I know that's like a big thing that I think about, you know, there is that precondition. Yeah.
So like Shelby said, there is a little bit of program eligibility for Housing Works, which the participant must be enrolled and active in school, whether it's high school or post-secondary, or they must be employed part-time or full-time or active in an employment support program. And then they must also be willing to engage in a financial literacy program. So yeah, we are very, very flexible with that eligibility. We absolutely do the best we can to make sure that no one is denied housing support, because that's why we have housing programs if we're going to deny people housing support. And at the very least, we're happy to connect them to those things. If they know that this is the right program for them, then absolutely we'll make the right referral so that they can maybe connect with an employment support program or get connected to school to meet that eligibility if that's something that they want to do. So this, why it works? Okay. So some of the challenges that we do have with Housing Works, sometimes we do, because their clients are a lower to moderate acuity, they are fairly independent, right? Which is a fantastic problem to have, but sometimes their independence doesn't necessarily line up with maybe the skill set that might be required to really understand their lease, or to really properly navigate something that might come up with a landlord. These are just examples. So sometimes, yes, absolutely, they will take it upon themselves to try to solve these problems or barriers or challenges or whatever it is as independently as they can. Without necessarily seeking the proper support and education. Again, independence, pretty good problem to have, but it is something sometimes that can be a little bit of a setback. Again, the doing with, not for approach to support. Sometimes they just skip the with piece altogether. Again, that's pretty fantastic, but it can kind of backtrack us a little bit. As always, affordable housing, I'm sure this is no surprise to anyone in this room. And then, of course, there's the stigma and discrimination that many of our clients face, especially because we do work with at-risk and homeless youth. That's kind of an ongoing challenge that I think all housing support workers probably deal with. And so why is Housing Works effective? Program duration is flexible depending on client needs. So yes, it absolutely offers that 1 year of support, but if they're doing really well and they're stable 6-7 months in, absolutely we're going to sit down, or we're going to kind of talk about where support can maybe taper off, and then really focus on the things that they might need some support with, or they might just be good to go 6 or 7 months in, and then just kind of touch base as needed if needed. There is a wider client age range than most other youth housing programs, and it supports clients who fall between the need for general housing assistance and HBCM. Shelby had already touched on that a little bit. And then collaboration with internal and external programming. So there is often that wraparound support. So more often than not, because of the eligibility criteria of having to be in school or working or in an employment program, many of my clients that I support are also working with a social support worker in one of these other programs. And then, of course, the financial matching subsidy is flexible, so they can either just hang on to it in case they do need it, or if they really do want to do the whole startup in one go. So. Sorry, Shelby.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I do, which is housing-based case management. So the HBCM, which is the short form, which I'll use from now on, just to keep it short. So HBCM, it aligns with a housing first approach. It's very client-centered, client-driven, strength-based. We support youth in finding and maintaining affordable, permanent, because what is permanent for a young person, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in looking at a permanent housing option as a forever home, but young people will eventually move on and change their where they're staying, but really that affordable, safe living environment for them. We are able to provide case management for up to 2 years. It's doing with, not for the client. It's very much community-based, practical, and hands-on approach. So really, really doing with the client from the ground up. So you're walking the walk with them, and it really is based out of their home. So my work is primarily done in the community inside of a client's home, because that's what we're working towards, making sure that they're safe in their home and they have the skills and the capacity to maintain their housing. So really that's what I feel makes it quite unique, just because it is based out of the home, and it's weekly home visits. So in the beginning, especially when someone's newly housed, sometimes I'm there more than once a week just to make sure that if something's gonna pop up, I'm gonna catch it right there in the beginning and support them with it, because having your own place comes with a lot of new feelings and experiences, right? So if you're coming from a shelter and you're moving into a new place, you got to figure out kind of what to do with yourself and what to do with your time, and also having your street family maybe come in and just stuff like that. So like I said, in-home life skills, so we'll do laundry, I'll support them in cleaning, building the furniture, moving really from the ground up, making sure they're well supported in-home. Also, it has flexible service provision hours, so really being on call, being able to provide supports outside of the 8 to 4. So, if there's a viewing at 6 p.m., we'll go to a viewing at 6 p.m. If there's a crisis on a weekend that truly is important and needs to be responded to, we're able to do something like that. And we use the SPDAT ongoing. So throughout our 2 years, the SPDAT is used to guide our case management, to look at the areas and the domains that perhaps need a little bit more support, or the client feels comfortable working on, and maybe some of those risk areas. So if they're scoring quite high in substance use, maybe that's an area that we should look at, because it's likely to impact their housing. And just some of the tools I listed, because I know a lot of people have questions about that, but we, in Ottawa, we use OrgCode. So the City of Ottawa provides us tools through OrgCode. So we get some tools like a crisis plan, a risk assessment, risk minimization plan, a budget, guest policy, exit plans, all those standardized tools that most agencies are using. But I believe they are free online if you go on the OrgCode website. So if you want to take a peek at them, I encourage you, because they are quite helpful in having a standardized approach. So I just wanted to talk about the coordinated access for youth, because I think this is the biggest piece, especially out of Ottawa. And I know it's kind of complex for some, but in Ottawa, we've developed quite a coordinated access for youth to receive housing-based case management support. So it's a collaboration between the City of Ottawa and community partners to prioritize and match youth to HBCM support. So every single month we get together as a team. I believe there's 8 community partners right now. I've listed them all on the slide. And we all come together and we have a running list of people who are waiting for housing supports between the ages of 16 and 24, and we match them to an agency for supports. It's very much a community approach, so it's not done behind the scenes. We get to all look at the data in front of us and make sure that we're prioritizing people properly and as quickly as we can. The way we prioritize youth in the City of Ottawa right now for housing-based case management services through the City of Ottawa is that we look at anyone who's 16 and 17 as the highest priority because they're most vulnerable. So if you're 16 or 17, you're going to go right to the top of our list, and you can bump anyone that maybe was there before if you have any additional prioritization areas checked off. So age, current living situation, so if you're street, couch surfing, or sheltered, or in shelter, another priority area. Pregnant or parenting, your TVI SPDAT score, so based on your acuity, that also provides you priority. If you're LGBTQS, if you have justice involvement. So those are the areas we look at to create up our prioritization list in Ottawa. It's been really beneficial in kind of supporting those who really need the support. Throughout the process, we recognize that, there are some of those folks that are 18 and over who just sit kind of halfway through the list because there is the younger folks at the top. So what we've done is after the age 18, we've taken the age out of the calculation, and we score it based on all those other priority areas. So current living situation, pregnant, and so on. So the hope is that if you're 18 to 24, it doesn't matter if you're 24 or if you're 18, but if you check off more of those priority areas, you'll be matched to a support service sooner. And so youth who identify as Indigenous are SPDATed by Wabano, which is a Aboriginal service here in Ottawa, and they are matched to a culturally appropriate service if they are willing. The hope is that if we have a Wabano worker come down, that we can provide them the opportunity to be culturally sensitive and have some of that exposure if they're not already connected. So just a little bit of some of the successes and challenges. So through our time with the Housing-Based Case Management Program, we've been doing it for a couple of years now. We were the first youth agency in Ottawa to be funded through the City of Ottawa to provide this service. And we've learned a lot. It's been more like 3 years now, but we've learned a lot now and kind of seeing on what works, what hasn't worked. And some of the major things that we saw in the beginning, and when we look through our stats, is congregate living. So shared living accommodations really worked for some of the youth. I know some people are like, what are you talking about? That is a recipe for disaster. It was for some. It was absolutely horrible for some, and put a lot of weight on my shoulders to do some mediation and clean up some messes, but for some it really worked, and some are still living in those situations to this date. What works is also having that tiered approach, so having those other programs that provide supports to the low and moderate acuity, so those who truly need it are being matched to the proper service, because HBCM is a quite intensive support. We're able to kind of filter that out. The housing allowances are pretty cool here in Ottawa. They were recently increased to $500. So anyone that is accessing an HBCM program here out of the 8 community partners that were listed are eligible to receive $500 for rent cost. And these are portable housing allowances, so they're not one-time use attached to the unit. They go with them. So if I get one and I move a year later, that housing allowance is mine until I make about $32,000 a year, which is quite a jump from what most are making, just under 10,000, maybe 12, so pretty good. I will say that's a new increase. It was $250 until about a couple of months ago, so it was a huge increase, and it's definitely been really helpful in kind of kickstarting some of those housing opportunities for some of those that were kind of stuck. Housing locators are really helpful, so I know a lot of different presentations have talked about the use of housing locators and what that looks like. For us, there's a landlord partnership program here in Ottawa that we have access to, and their full-time job is to go out there and find housing. So they engage with landlords. They essentially are salespeople. They sell the program and what we do, the in-home support, the housing allowance, and they take away that groundwork that as a case manager is sometimes hard to do, and it's hard to do with a client there, right? To have the landlord say some of those things and ask those questions in front of the client. So the housing locators are really helpful in kind of doing that groundwork, so we can really try to be housing first focused and getting people housed right away once they're matched to our services. It also, I still do some of that housing locating, so, fostering those strong relationships with landlords, even when once someone's housed, is really important to make sure that the landlord feels comfortable as well as the tenant, but it really helps kind of eliminate some of those really challenging situations that can arise. So if there's a very messy situation, if you have that good relationship with the landlord, for the most part, they'll come to you and they don't want to put the work into doing anything formal. So it's been really helpful. So the in-home supports and then the community supports have been a huge shift. So kind of eliminating that office time and having clients come to the office is not something that we really do anymore. It's more in your world where I'm more likely to support you better. And having wraparound support. So something that has been really beneficial is working from an agency that has such a large variety of programming. So like Dawn mentioned in the beginning, we have employment programs, we have housing programs, we have a school, we have all of these things that have been so helpful in connecting the youth back to work on their goals or whatever it is that they're really focusing in on. So once they're stabilized, we can start to connect them back to some of the internal programming. So that's been a really helpful piece. So areas for improvement, really standard, minimal housing options, affordability, a barrier for everyone, no matter what, whether you're homeless or not. Discrimination. So for youth, some of the major challenges that we have come across is really things that are sometimes out of these controls. So credit checks, they don't have credit when they're 16 or 17. Or maybe they do and it's not so great, but that's been a huge barrier. So police record checks, once they see a young person who maybe doesn't appear to look as clean as the next person or whatever it may be, they want a police check, they want this, they want that. So age, the stereotype, so you're just gonna party, you're gonna bring all your friends, all those type of things. And there's a huge ask for guarantors. If you're under 18, or even if you're over 18, they want you to have a guarantor to sign for you. So that's been a huge barrier for us because as an agency, we cannot do something like that. And it's likely that the youth don't have someone in their life that can sign and take on responsibility for their lease if anything goes wrong. So we've had to get creative in that sense. Something that we like to do is, talk to the landlord. Is it possible to do a double deposit? Like, can we do last month's rent twice? Been really helpful, and some landlords really take to that. It's not your typical approach, but it's really all about being creative and trying to navigate some of these barriers that we really face. And landlords' previous experience. So because we did have the adult sector come out strong with the housing first approach, some landlords have already worked with the program, so they've already worked with the landlord partnership program, which is the housing locators or whatever it may be, and they're not so keen to work with us anymore. Maybe they had a bad experience or whatever it may be, so that's been a bit of a challenge because a lot of our affordable housing is in pretty key areas and it's all in one area, so it makes it a little bit harder for us. So why does a tiered approach work? So why is it helpful for us to have general housing, housing works, and housing-based case management? It allows us to have a little bit of a one-stop shop. So there's a program for everyone. It's not really that cookie-cutter approach where someone comes in, sits in your office, gets support, leaves. And it's not a cycle anymore. We have a program that can kind of fit the needs and the style that hopefully almost everyone can work with. So general housing, just for those that just want to stop in and out, get the support when they need it, but they really don't want that hassle of the follow-up, to the very intensive support where I'm in your home once a week. It can be invasive, but it's really beneficial. And it really just speaks to the unique needs of some of the youth. It gives agency or Operation Come Home or any agency an overview of housing needs and trends across all acuities. So we're able to support more than just the highest risk youth, but also some of the lower risk youth. OCH delivery creates opportunity to provide a wide range of ongoing wraparound supports that work and matter for youth. So really, because we have all those internal programs that I talked about before, it really allows us to have that wraparound support. So it's very easy for me to refer people to programs, whether or not it's in the community, but also internally. And it allows for ongoing advocacy for youth homelessness and housing. So really, just to wrap up, some next steps. So some areas that we're going to focus on and really look into is the peer supports. I know including youth is so key, but it does come with being ready, and we don't want to dive into an area that we're not ready to take on, but we've been setting ourselves up and really looking into hopefully providing peer support within our housing programs. So continuing to build those landlord partnerships, because without them, we can't house our youth. More housing-based case managers within our own agency, but also in the community, and master leasing. So there's that question mark, because that's a new area for Operation Come Home. We've never had any type of residential housing or whatever that looks like. So just providing the opportunity to be a landlord, or have partnerships with landlords to be kind of the leaseholder, and then have youth who are in our program stay in the unit. So those are areas that we're looking to focus on, just based on some of the challenges and barriers that we've faced, and hopefully they can help build some of our programs. That's it, I think. I think we're almost, we went a little over, but so we'll wrap that up. I think we have a couple of minutes if there's any questions. Yeah.
I have a couple really specific ones because I'm a nerd, but I'm from Washington, D.C., so I love to hear about coordinated entry and all of that good stuff. But real quick on the GHA, do you get that funded? How is it consistent across, if other agencies provide that similar kind of a la carte sort of service model? How do you ensure consistency across agencies? We have a lot of drop-in centers and low barrier shelters, but I would be worried about the consistency across and amounts provided, if it was prevention assistance, that kind of thing.
I think the challenge is it's hard to make it consistent. So for us, some of our programs are city funded. So most of our housing programs are city funded, but we also have United Way funding. Consistency is going to be a challenge, because within Ottawa, I don't believe we have that. Every agency does not provide a tiered approach, or if they do, it's not set in the same way. Every agency is working in their own way. I don't think I have a better answer. I don't think there is a consistent approach. Most agencies are doing it. It's just how they word it. So if you have a drop-in, most likely you're doing general housing. You're doing general supports, and you're doing that groundwork, and you're referring people and connecting them to those long-term supports if they need it. To have that tiered approach, or the a la carte, you really got to have those other programs that provide that case management or intensive support, I think. Yep.
For those other breakouts, like justice involvement or anything else like that, do you take those questions from the answers on the TBI's app, or do you have some other data source that you're pulling that from in order to inform that prioritization?
Good question. It is in the TBI SPDAT, so there is an area I think it's a one question where it says, do you have any legal stuff going on? That's how it's worded. So that lets us know, but really we have an additional tool. So when I'm inputting, say I go out and I SPDAT you in the community, you want to work in the program, I'll fill in your information, and I put in I have to ask those extra questions. So I have to ask if you are parenting or pregnant. It is in the VI SPDAT, but just those extra questions to make sure I can properly check them off, because if I don't, then you don't get that priority. So we have to ask those questions. Something really helpful as well that we have in our prioritization and coordinated access is a comment section. So if there's relevant information, because there always is, we fought hard for this extra box for comments, because it's unbiased, right? It's not about what you think or feel, but if this person's truly at risk, it's not going to show on this coordinated access system. So if someone is in a highly abusive situation and needs to leave, I'm going to write that, because there needs to be some context to that, and the city has allowed us to have that additive to really speak to some of those areas that the VI SPDAT isn't talking about. And also, because if Dom is doing the VI SPDAT and then I'm at that monthly meeting looking at the prioritization meeting, how are we going to know the context of that individual situation? I will say at these prioritization and matching meetings for housing-based case management services, there's no names on the list. So we look at a pretty bland paper, so it's to take away those biased opinions, because if you work in the homelessness sector, you probably know a lot of the people on the list. So it really allows us to look at what we're presented with, what the priority areas are, what the comments are, and really the whole picture. Yeah. Thank you.
Have you come across youth in the housing-based case management program that are in a spousal type relationship and want to live together?
Yes. Absolutely. We go with it. It's client choice. If they want to live with their spouse, we can go ahead and support them. It doesn't mean we can get an extra housing allowance. It does mean we can use the 2 incomes if they have it to look into housing options.
What happens if one qualifies for the program based on the
Mhm.
the other doesn't, and then they separate? Does the case manager stay with one that qualifies, or would they go?
So technically the person that was matched to the service would be the person that I would continue to support. If the spouse was engaged in services and part of that work, because for the most part you do try to work mostly with the individual, but there is some time when it does overlap, and for the housing to be successful to do some of that collaborative stuff, I could always spit at them and put them on the prioritization list, and you will see that when there's people in their world that they're very close with, whether it's a spouse or even just a friend that stays there all the time, they then want to be on that prioritization and matching waiting list to get the support and services, which is not always a bad thing. But
You mentioned the exit after 2 years. Is that current?
sorry.
The exit after 2 years, so they can qualify for 2 years of is that for once the 2 years hit?
That's based on the city, what they told us, but no. Because the way I look at it is if there's something in your life that is going to put your housing at risk, so maybe even just the addition of a new child. So if I'm working with you and you're about to have a baby, and we now need to find you a larger housing unit, we're probably going to have to, and it's near the end of the 2 years, we're probably going to have to go past that. It's very much situational. It's not as common, but I have seen it twice where I've had to carry someone on my caseload for more than 2 years, and it's okay for the most part. Mm-hmm. We do balance our caseload, so based on, sometimes you'll have clients who are at a different level of acuity, so maybe they started high, now they're at moderate, maybe they're low. And with that, we have a ratio that we use. So if you have a mixed caseload, you can have 20 clients. If you have all high acuity, you're only going to have 12 at a time. So really, because we're able to flex our caseloads, we can have clients, a couple extra clients here and there, because clients are going to be at different areas in their stabilization and their housing. So, yeah. Yes. Christmas cards, like it.
I mean, I guess in the sense of if a youth is placed with the landlord, not that those knows the particulars about what's happening, but is there a worker that does think there's an issue on the landlord and
Yes, so the landlord partnership program here in Ottawa, which is based out of the Salvation Army, there's 2 housing locators for all housing first programs in Ottawa that are funded through the city, so the adult sector and the youth sector. So they got a big role to fill, and they have to find housing suitable for youth and adults. But they are if I go to a viewing with a client, they come with me, and they're there to talk to the landlord, and I'm there to support the client. So they are. And their pitch is that we're here to support you ongoing while the client's here. So if you want to evict the client, I'm here to help you do that, or to mediate it, hopefully, and I'm there to help mediate it. But they're there to provide that support if they want to do an N11 or whatever it is. So it's very unique, and that's really how we engage the landlord and sell what we have to offer, really, because that's what they do. It's sales. They're not social workers for the most part. They're really have experience in real estate or whatever that is. So just to provide them support. It's pretty, like, they don't know the clients. They're very removed from the situation. So, yeah. Anyone else? It's almost 4, so I know people should be coming back here soon. So I guess that's all we have.
Yep, that's all, yes, that's all we, okay. And we'll be around too if you have any questions for us. Okay, great. Thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time. Thank you. Am I gonna lift Tammy off the ground there? Okay.
Coordinated access until they decided, okay, we need more workers, and they funded 3 external agencies. So it was like a little,
The city did.
the city. So we had a little group of people, and I was like, oh, yes, there's people with me, and there's people I can talk to. There's other agencies in the city of Ottawa that do it, but not through the city of Ottawa, so it's not coordinated access. Technically, it's within their own internal agency, and they've just taken on that as their first model. But yeah, it's really, really neat to see it develop and see that the community members are really taking a stance and saying what they want. And they just recently, I think 5 new positions were just funded, and 3 were in the Indigenous community, and because there was a huge need, and it's been pretty successful. Because now our priority list is shrinking. The hope is that we'll have no one on that list, but we were just sitting at a standstill for so long.
Great. So we're giving them outside.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there
Hey.
the startup packages? Is that Chippy?
Oh, yeah.
Like the startup in what way?
Like the last
Oh,
one's right
great.
there.
Okay.
So startup packages. So general
Now you do.
So we don't usually use our funding. We usually use social assistance, like calling OW and stuff like that. But it would be Chippy. HPS is HPCM.
Yep.
And then housing works is actually United Way, which is why it's a little bit less customer first. We're trying to like change the game, but that's a whole area to focus on.
Do you have a card?
I do. I'll just drop by there for
I was hoping if we could, I want to
For sure. Yeah, yeah. We have, so Liza is part of our housing and supports committee, but we have the action committees based on all the 4 pillars, and there's always opportunities. If you have your card, I'd love to talk to you some more, and we can.
Liza was actually joined. I will find a curve.
Yeah. I have mine too. If you.
So which program are you with at Salone?
It's the Exit Up program.
Exit Up.
Exit Up, yeah. And it's quite a small program. Sorry, I really
Yeah. Thank you.
It's changed a little bit. Supervised program now. Registered, but yeah, the program essentially works with Indigenous adults who are between the ages of 18 and 25 and have been or are trying to transition in care.
Yeah.
So that's
So predominantly your focus is on Indigenous youth?
yeah, everyone in a program is like a First Nation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really good. We do good work. We're really small. Like it's me and it's one other individual.
Yeah.
And then we kind of, I don't know, what would you call it? Spiritual care coordinator. She's right here. She
I know her.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So she just started doing our Indigenous programming and stuff before we were always kind of reaching out. Now we have her on a weekly basis to kind of present tradition.
Great.
Yeah, we provide holistic support
you find that, how does that work with salons?
Yeah, that's a
Right?
common question all
Yeah,
the time. Yeah,
I'm
no, 'cause
curious.
people are like, it's a Christian humanitarian organization. How are you like? So our organization, like, you don't need to subscribe to any sort of Christian religion or like practice and work there. And we do, like, we are trying to move further towards, like, our practice is being reflected in the day, right? So we want to cater to the people that we serve. And considering that a large majority of who we serve are Indigenous, we want to be able to, if we can ourselves, provide that connection, then at least have
Any relation to Carl? Freeze. I know that last name. That's interesting. I actually find that really interesting.
Yeah, so I think
Because it'd be such a
Salon
conflict.
it shouldn't be. Like,
It shouldn't be,
we
but
do, like, I mean,
historically.
yes, for sure. And I think there's still this idea that Salon does more engagement, or like I've even heard people being like, so if someone like subscribes to LGBTQ
Two, hey, check this. 1, 2. 2, 2, hey, check.
Maybe like 30 seconds, but I can hear all the background noise.
So then you're gonna hear this. Check 1, 2.
Such a disconnect, right?
it's trying to okay, this is what we need. Husband first, like husband is right and not like just different ideas.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But yeah, we definitely work hard to
That's really nice to hear. I know, not historically, but I mean in the past, it seems that, Shalom has been a bit more very in the box, right? And so it's kind of nice to hear that there's some progress being made, and, especially considering, I can't imagine what your population percentage is as far as Indigenous people.
Yeah, it is so important, but yeah, we are
That's exciting.
reflecting the nation behind. So we're working really hard. Like we do, like in my office, because everyone, is Indigenous. So we have sage and like the ability to smudge if you want, and like we've made drums with people in the past.
And how's the rules around like substance abuse? Because I know that's always been a barrier for young people, is that there's such an abstinence-based perspective.
Right, and so I've really been pushing in my own little role. There's this, we recognize that it's not working. So my office is at the Madison, which is our support housing unit. But yeah, there's a very strong value and belief that everyone needs to sober on the premises, and that's just not realistic. Irrespective of the fact of whether they actually have addiction issues, it's like we have some kids who are 18, 19, up to 25, right? Actually, we've pushed it with people who are 27 now too, but like what 18-year-old gets into experimenting with drugs or whatever. So
The recognition that it's a coping mechanism.
Exactly.
right? Yeah, and it's not fully
Way of
something
managing the trauma.
no, for sure. So what I'm wanting, and I think the direction that Savon is kind of going to be moving in, is trying to find a completely different housing approach to how to house our youth.
Exciting.
Yeah, because it just, I think we knew at the time, because Liza will even say this herself, that she never actually really wanted us to be housed in Madison.
Oh, okay.
That's not to say the Madison isn't.
No.
Like, it's got its benefits and things, but it also definitely has a struggle. One of the largest barrier, I would say, is, like the requirement that people remain abstinent for at least 1 year before sobriety.
So you guys have not new, but relatively new director.
Yes. Yeah.
How's that been working? Were you there with the previous director?
I was for a year.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Jim Bell is now our director. He's been well received. I'm biased. I know him personally.
Okay.
I would say he was met with some, at the beginning, like skepticism and some resistance because of his background as a
Right.
management, right? So like even me, like I'm like, I know him from this area, but I would never have expected him
Right.
to be like he. I'll say, like, as far as I know, he's been really well received, and I think it's because he came into his position with such like open hands, and wanted to, like, I think he's just learned a whole lot.
So with some of the direction that you want to go around Indigenous perspective, and
Very, very receptive.
so it's more the upper board that's kind of like, yeah.
And it's funny because we were just talking, I was talking to Ramona, who's also in spiritual care, and she's, I guess wanting to get like more sponging and more other things. I don't really have that as much as a problem from Madison, but maybe it's just because I do some things sometimes. But
Yeah.
she was just rolling her eyes, and she was, I don't know why I need to like create a document on why this is important or why this matters. And like kind of packaging it in this way that they'll get it. And it's like it should be so obvious, but if they don't have that
But
same
if they don't have that understanding,
so it's definitely, Siloam is not like a clear information, and that's always been like kind of a disconnect. But I truly believe that we try and be as inclusive as possible and as accepting.
That's good.
Yeah,
Exciting. Front line, right?
yeah, and they get it, right? You can see it.
That's nice. Good. Yeah, so definitely connect with Denisa.
Yeah. I'll give you my card too. It's in my jacket right over there.
We're doing a lot of work with like EIA and child welfare. The working groups that have been meeting, especially with EIA, we've been focusing a lot on the quick wins and really learning. We're learning from them, and they're learning from us. The quick wins when it comes to youth homelessness. We've been talking about their policies and where things could change. What are the barriers our young people are seeing? So just even in our ongoing conversation, they're pretty enthusiastic about it. That they're open to what we're saying, and they've been really responsive. EIA has been really responsive.
That's really great to hear.
Yeah. Well, and that's a lot of the front line.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they've been open to hearing that, because we've sit with them, and then we're sitting with sort of the policy level people, and we said, well, there's a disconnect from what you say as a policy level to what happens on the front line.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of sort of understanding being created. But they're really open to some of the recommendations we're making around EIA and our big tackle now is child welfare. Whole nother animal.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. Just no quick wins there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really happy that
Yeah, no, thanks for coming and introducing yourself. And there's always opportunities. Everyone plays a role, right? And in youth homelessness, and you definitely are with the Exit Up program. So, we'd love to, I'd love to reconnect with you once. Yeah.
sorry, I never got.
Tammy.
2. Hey, check. You think that that's good enough until 5:30? Nope. I replaced them like an hour and a half ago.
One Q&A?
No, those at the panel. And we just have
I know you can't trust these. Half bar doesn't mean half.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Specific seats?
Here we are at the end of the first day. How's everyone's day been? Oh, that didn't sound very good. We try that again. How's everyone's day been? Yeah, all right. Well, hopefully it's been a good day. I know there's been lots of exciting presentations. I've been sitting in on a few when I can, and lots of conversations happening and people engaging in the Memorial Spirit Room and going to the Youth Stream workshops. I'm just going to start us off with a few announcements and reminders, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Mike to introduce our closing panel for today. So first of all, we're learning as we go. We're going to refine our lunch system tomorrow. I understand that some folks who had ordered special meals or who would prefer special meals weren't able to get those, and that's not great. I'm a vegetarian. I'm deeply sympathetic to not having the right food. So if you have on your name tag, you have a little SM, that means we know that you have a special meal, and your special meal is coming with your name on it. So if you have an SM, then, and we realized after it's kind of a funny designation actually, but it stands for special meal. Special meal. Get your minds out of the gutter. But if you have an SM on your name tag, then we're going to actually separate out the special meal boxes. So we'll have 2 tables tomorrow. So you can just go right to that table and get your box, which is labeled with your name. If you require a special meal, if you're vegan or gluten-free, lactose-free, or vegetarian, but you didn't let us know, that's fine. We have extras, and they'll just be in the regular box. But we're hoping this way we'll make sure that everyone who can't eat or doesn't want to eat the beef or pork, etc., will be able to get the meals that they want. So we'll try that tomorrow. Thanks for bearing with us as we figure that out. I thought the lunch boxes were pretty yummy. So in the program, there's a description of Gourmet Express, who is the social enterprise that provided those lunch boxes. So I hope you enjoyed them. I will note, however, one point of failure that I realized today as we were all drinking coffee from styrofoam cups and styrofoam plates and eating out of those lunch boxes is how much garbage we're generating. And I'm really sorry about that. We didn't think that through carefully or sort of work with our caterer to try and reduce garbage, which is also something I'm really conscious of and is a point of learning for future. So just want to acknowledge that. A few more announcements. We have water bottles now, which were supposed to arrive last week and didn't, and arrived today, midway through. So some of you, we've been handing out water bottles. You might have gotten, if you haven't yet picked up a Coming Up Together water bottle, it's more of a water bag. There's a bunch on the table as you walk out. Just pick one up. You may have noticed you can't purchase bottled water at U of O. It's a water bottle like plastic water bottle free zone, which is fabulous. And that's why we wanted to provide you with water bottles, which are plastic, but they're reusable, that you can use. There's a water fountain basically straight that way near the washrooms to fill up and carry around with you. So water bottles. The art show I wanted to remind everyone about the art show. It's being taken down now, but please go visit it tomorrow. It's a little bit out of the way, so I think folks aren't necessarily noticing it. And it's if you go out this way and then right to the end of the 4th floor, it's in 4012. I think. But there's signs. And there's just beautiful artwork that was created by young people. All the artwork is for sale. Our volunteers there are feeling very lonely. So please go and check out the art. And same with the if you need winter clothing or rain clothing, the Winter Clothing Bank is in that direction too. So feel free to check those out. And also, our walking tours are not full. We thought they would fill up right away. So please be sure to add your name to a walking tour. These walking tours are going to be phenomenal. They were designed by members of our youth team, and they're meant to give you a sense of what it is to experience homelessness as a young person in Ottawa. And they'll all start from here at U of O and do a walk around the area within an hour on Thursday at lunch. So the sign up is at the registration table, which is now taken apart, but tomorrow come and sign up for the walking tours when you arrive. I think I talked very fast. I just had a coffee. But without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mike Bilthouse, who is going to introduce the closing panel for today.
Thanks very much, Jackie. And I have to say, it's not the most common that the conference convener is, it feels like repeatedly mentioning the failures of a conference. And that's so not what's on all of our mind. And so I want to assure Jackie that this has been an amazing gathering thus far. And thank you so much for pulling us all together. Yes. So my name is Mike Bilthouse with Making the Shift, a youth homelessness social innovation lab that is co-led by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and Away Home Canada. And it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon and to walk us through a final panel for today around addressing the experiences of homeless youth on the margins. And so I'm just going to set the context for us again. This is really drawing from the information that's in our program, and we'll then introduce our esteemed panelists. So as we all, or as many of us I think know, the experiences of homeless youth are not homogenous. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit youth, LGBTQ2SI youth, racialized youth, newcomer youth, many are overrepresented in our stats, and many are doubly or triply marginalized, not just because of their homelessness, but as due to racism, homophobia, transphobia, and others. Although the specific needs of these subpopulations are frequently mentioned, and we talk about them, they are rarely the focus of our research, our policy, and service provision. And so our panelists this afternoon are going to discuss how these experiences, barriers, and needs of these populations can be more effectively captured, identified, and addressed in research, policy, and service work. Of course, in our effort to end youth homelessness, it's imperative that we understand the diverse needs of young people so that we can respond accordingly. So I'm very excited to have with us 5 panelists, and I know there's 4 names in your program, but that's the dynamism of this conference. I'm going to introduce 5 panelists. So here to extend the regrets from Tina Slauenweit, who wished to be with us today but is ill today and so is unable to be with us. And so we have two individuals who are going to be speaking in that place. So maybe what I'll do is I'll introduce the 4 now, and then we'll sort of invite each of the 5 now, and then we'll invite each of them to speak for about 10 minutes. I know it's the end of the day. We're going to invite a little bit of time for the panelists to engage with one another, and we do want to open it up for Q&A or comments from the audience. And so we're scheduled to go until around 5:30, and we'll see how our energy carries us through the rest of the afternoon. So again, I'll introduce them all. And so our first speaker after the introductions is going to be Edgar Baraga. Edgar is the co-chair of the steering committee for Away Home Ottawa. He has been working with Away Home Ottawa since the beginning of the process as one of the 4 youth liaisons. Edgar is also a musician and is currently working on an album that will be coming out this summer. And he is performing tomorrow night. And that's at Mavericks? Maverick. So the information is in your program on that, so that's going to be great. After Edgar, we're going to have Sydney, who is second from the end there. Sydney is the Director of Community Impact and Strategic Relations at Wood Green Community Services in Toronto. Sydney brings a decade of experience building meaningful intersectoral relationships and catalyzing holistic housing and community service delivery. She's been leading the incubation and launch of Wood Green's new program, Free to Be, Housing First for Youth Leaving Care, and has managed the province-wide scaling of Wood Green's Homeward Bound program across Ontario, including the development of the Urban Indigenous Homeward Bound, which is a cultural and place-based adaptation of Homeward Bound in 6 Friendship Center communities. Sydney has a BA in Sociology from the University of Chicago and an MSc in Ecological Economics from the University of Edinburgh. Outside of Wood Green, Sydney's a volunteer and a board member with the Stop Gap Foundation. Following Sydney, we're going to have Katie Burkholder-Harris and Charlotte Smith. Katie Burkholder-Harris is, and I'm going off the cuff here, but this is the great thing about this panel is I've worked with and engaged with each of these incredible individuals already. Katie recently left the position of coordinating the Away Home Ottawa Youth Homelessness Table here in Ottawa to start a new position working on systems planning at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. Prior to that, Katie finished her Master's in Public Health at the University of Toronto and has been engaged in quite a bit of frontline service, including at CMHA, so brings a wealth of frontline academic and policy experience, and is going to speak with Charlotte Smith. Charlotte is a sociology student at Carleton University. Charlotte was also a research liaison, is a research liaison with the Away Home Ottawa Table, and has been a member of the planning committee for this conference, and so has been deeply engaged in the planning of that, and also comes to us as a youth expert, someone with lived experience of homelessness. And Charlotte and Katie are going to share a bit about the Away Home Ottawa story. And rounding us up is Alex Abramovich, sitting at the end of our table. Alex is an independent scientist at the Institute for Mental Health Policy Research, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. Dr. Alex Abramovich has been addressing the issue of LGBTQ2S youth homelessness for over 10 years. His program of research focuses on healthcare utilization and service access for LGBTQ2S youth experiencing homelessness and transgender and gender-expansive individuals. Alex has worked closely with municipal and provincial governments to develop strategies that address the needs of LGBTQ2S youth. So, an amazing group, and I won't hold us back any further. We're going to start off with Edgar.
Yay.
Do you want to speak from there? Come here.
Sure. Get up.
Right on.
Thank you, Mike, for the very beautiful introduction. As you said, my name is Edgar. I've been working with Away Home Ottawa for over 2 years and some change. I'll be honest with you guys, when I was told to come here, at first I was really nervous. You know, I saw the amazing names of doctors and scientists and professions that have been doing this for a very long time. And I was really nervous, and I talked to Katie, and I was like, what am I going to talk about? Because she sent me a huge research thing, and I just couldn't I just didn't understand, and I just didn't relate to it, the numbers, the statistics, and all that good stuff. But she told me, listen, you've been doing this for 2 years. You've met these people, you've met this marginalized youth, and you've had that firsthand experience to just talk about that. And I've met, I was looking at the Inuit and indigenous statistics of the youth that are homeless, and I was looking at that, and I realized every time I went to all these different meetings and workshops with all this different youth, I remember always, realizing that time after time they would talk about their history and how they've had such a traumatic history that still, has been passed on from generation to generation. And that was part of the research. And I know a lot of these people here who have done this work way longer are going to expand on that and talk a little bit more about that. I remember the first time when I got hired for this job, Katie and I were tasked to go around and talk to all these different youth and try to create a youth-led team. And we were talking to some of the LGBTQ youth team, and I remember something that dawned on me was that, not only are they already marginalized and put in a place where, they're not accepted by society, but as an LGBTQ youth, I feel that, when you're put in a shelter and in a place where you're dealing with people that have addiction and mental health issues and all that stuff, I think you're put more at risk. And that was something that was put in the research paper as well. And I know some of you guys will expand a little bit more on that. Something I wanted to talk about in detail is the newcomer experience. I remember going with Katie to a family shelter. This was maybe my first trip ever. And we're sitting there, we're talking about what we're trying to do and how we're trying to end youth homelessness in Ottawa. And, some of the youth will look at us like, what do you mean by this? We're not really homeless. We're in a beautiful place. We have a family. We just, escaped the war. We're refugees where we're coming from. I mean, I knew that there's more that could be done, and they should expect more, and we should give more. But they didn't understand that. So even just that lack of clarity and lack of understanding around the system is something that's really big, and I've realized that a lot with newcomers. I remember when I first moved here, I didn't want to take welfare because I felt that welfare is something that you look at as shameful, and you don't want to be a burden. I remember sitting in school, and people were always, like, oh man, I hate people who are on welfare, they're lazy, blah, blah, and all this good stuff. And I never wanted to be that, so, there's a lack of clarity and understanding around the system, especially when you've just moved here, that I think needs to be dealt with. Another issue that I've realized with the system is I feel sometimes service providers need to work more together, and I think that as a co-chair on the steering committee with the Way Home Ottawa, I've realized that sometimes there's issues of funding and all this politics that I find, quite frankly, ridiculous, because you're there to provide a bigger service than just politics. So I think that's something that needs to be dealt with, and maybe some of the people on this panel will address how they can deal with that. But I think that that's something, especially when, as a person that has been on the receiving end of all these amazing services, I think it's ridiculous that you have to sit there and you have to see people competing, and yet I feel like if there was an integrated system that was where the workload was evenly distributed and the funding was evenly distributed, that would be much more beneficial for the youth and the service providers, because everyone would get a piece of the cake. But that's just my opinion. What else did I want to say? Well, I also think that one of the things I've always said since I got hired was that there needs to be a change in the way we look at youth, and we need to start looking at these marginalized groups as people that are productive members, future leaders, doctors, lawyers, job creators, and job sustainers. And I think if we start looking at marginalized youth like that, there's going to be a community involvement that I think there's a lack of right now, because there's no reason why, if you start to look at them people in that sense, I think people would be more inclined to get behind a movement like this. But other than that, I do have a lot of great things to say about the work that we've been doing here for the last 2 years, and I think there's a lot of great people out there. There's a lot of great service providers, and there's a lot of great programs out there for people. But I think we're moving in the right direction. That's it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Are you all with us? Are you awake? Hello? Thank you. It's just going to be 1 second. We're just queuing this up. Thanks to all of you for staying with us until the sweet end today. We really, really appreciate you being here. Just while this is getting set up, I just really, really want to give thanks for the land that we're gathered on here today. And all day, the words of our elder this morning have stayed with me about remembering that nature is the living book of our history, and that this is our original home, and that we need to take care of that and keep that remembrance with us as we move through our day, even as we move through a really busy day of a conference. And on a rainy day like this, I felt lucky to step outside for a minute and get some air and feel a little bit of a drizzle before coming back in here to you. Thank you. Okay, sorry, okay. I also really want to thank the organizers today, and so thank you, and to all the folks who have been volunteering, and also specifically thank the young people who have been helping direct the course of the conference. I know even from preparing and reading through the program and seeing all of the very special and thoughtfully curated arts events and commemorative events and different pieces, that to me is what creates the experience that we come here to share together, and that really means a lot to me. And I also I know this is all part of the experience for me. I really want to thank my partners with making the shift, with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and Away Home. Although we're all here through different points of relation and through the universities and many organizations, I'm very aware that this is a time in history where we as a common community across the country have come together to really end youth homelessness and to work towards prevention. And so that's always very close to my mind and my heart, and certainly with me as we think about the work that we're doing on the ground. So anyway, those were some of the thoughts that I'm bringing into the conference. And also to really recognize, I was thinking I had a chance to chat with Cindy from this morning's plenary a little bit, and just reflecting on the fact that all of this is very personal, and whether everybody in the room has been personally impacted, the work that we're doing is personal, and so it is for me too, and certainly in my extended family, we have been, I think everybody has been affected by mental health and by different systems, by homelessness as a symptom of intergenerational trauma and other challenges. And so that awareness is very much with me and alive. So before I continue, I want to start by just sharing a little video with you. Hopefully I can.
Hey Dad, so my check engine light has been on for like a day. Am I still good? Hey Dad?
Hey Dad?
Dad, my battery's out. How do I turn it back on?
Hey Dad, what's my social security number?
The check engine light turned off by itself. That's good, right?
What is the Roth IRA? Dad, the plunger's not working. It's not working at all.
How many buttons can I put in an outlet before it explodes? Hey, so this other line showed up. It's kind of a squiggle line with an exclamation point. Is that okay?
Can I pay my taxes with a 401k? Is that the same thing? Hey Dad, when's Mom's birthday again?
Hey Dad, what's my PIN number? Hey Dad, has your car ever made the sound like
Hey Dad, how do you tie a tie again? It's like over under through a rabbit hole or something. Are taxes and 401k related at all?
Exactly, yes!
Wait, Dad. I'm still on your insurance, right? Hey Dad, what is 2-cycle fuel?
Yeah, Dad, kind of like Grandpa.
Hey Dad, what if the gas has been on since yesterday?
Hey, Dad, can you just come get me?
Hey Dad, what's my social security number? Is it like 263? What are you looking at? Oh, that's my address.
It was like this. Yeah, like a drowning Chewbacca. Exactly, Dad.
Wait, Dad. I'll call my dad, Dad.
Did you get that?
Okay, so although this is a very lighthearted video, part of why I want to share it is that it's a reminder around how easy it is to take parental roles for granted. And I think that this is something that we see all the time. Whether or not it's your own personal experience, I think that even in adulthood, that connection to family and that connection to needing support and wanting somebody to call is just very, very present. And so I wanted to share it just as a starting point to maybe make us stop and reflect a little bit on some of those things that are often taken for granted. And that very much leads into the specific demographic that I've had the opportunity to be researching. So as was mentioned earlier, I'm with Wood Green Community Services in Toronto. Wood Green is a multi-service agency. We have 36 locations. We're really big. We do a whole bunch of things for a whole bunch of different people across Toronto. And we're also a nonprofit housing provider. And I would say we're most well known for some very innovative solutions to very critical social needs and looking at them through a holistic services lens and bringing housing and holistic supports together. And a couple of years ago, in the context of some of our other programs, a conversation started talking about what population really isn't being served in a very targeted way in our community. Where is there gaps in what's existing? And young people transitioning out of care, Crown wards, youth that have had intersections with the child welfare system was that population that really came up for us. And it led to myself and some colleagues applying to Ontario Trillium Foundation for a seed grant, which was successful, to actually do a community-based research study or a community-based action research project to really look at what young people aging out of care felt that they needed that maybe wasn't already available in the community, to meet with service providers, to talk with sector leaders, and to really bring together a very diverse intersection of folks to look at if we were going to design an intentional model of service for young people transitioning out of care with a lens to homelessness prevention, what would that be? And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the details of the research, but we did meet with more than 200 sector stakeholders. I'm looking at Carol Howes in the back corner at Covenant House because she spent many hours meeting with us and talking, and I see many other people in the room who we've intersected with through that project. We also spent time with more than 60 young people with lived experience of the child welfare system. They participated in a number of focus groups. A number of young people also formed a youth advisory council that we're still working with today to really ensure that there was an aspect of co-design in terms of not just getting input around what was missing in the community, but to also work together to design what could a new model of service look like. So through that work, there's a couple of things I want to share. And so one of the pieces is that we did create a report called Voices from the Child Welfare System. And I guess I could keep flipping through these. I don't know if I'm doing it right. Anyway, it's okay. No, it's okay. Don't even worry. I'm happy to share more information with you all. So we did create a written report of all of our findings, and I'm very happy to share that with any of you. So please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll do that. I just wanted to share with you, though, a couple of the highlights of what we learned from young people. And one thing that's very alive for me right now is that I feel like the people in this room already share a certain collective ethos. We're all here for a reason because everybody, each of you in your own way, is already leading some kind of change within yourself, within your community. And so I'm reluctant to stand here and just tell you a bunch of statistics that you probably already know or intuitively believe because of the experiences you've had in your own lives. But just a couple of points to share is that one of the big pieces we learned through our work was that, and I think of Jane Kovarakova, who just published a report that was a 40-year analysis of outcomes for young people leaving care. She found that in Canada, the States, the UK, and Australia, outcomes over 40 years haven't changed. And that's specifically across outcome areas of housing, education, mental and physical health, employment, and social isolation versus connection. Oh, thanks. So So those pieces are very, very relevant. And a couple of other stats that I just want you to be aware of are specifically, and again, we're very fortunate to have the researchers that led this study with us in the conference, that the National Youth Homelessness Survey that came out in 2016 found that 57.8% of homeless youth in Canada that were surveyed in that study had some involvement in the child welfare system. So when we talk about youth homelessness in our lands, we really can't separate that from the complex trauma that young people experience early on in their families. And whether they happen to come into that system as part of the last resort or whether they're not intersecting with the system, those traumas are very present. We know that young people coming out of care are twice as likely as war veterans to have PTSD. And we know that 44% of young people aging out of care in Ontario graduate high school, which is half the provincial average. So those are some of the things that we learned. I think I'll leave it at that for the moment, just to give you a bit of a taster. But again, as I said, happy to share our report. One of the things that we also included in the report are a number of different quotes from the young people whose voices contributed to the research. And so you can read in their own words what the experience was like of becoming evicted because a caseworker didn't send them their payment on time and therefore they lost their housing, and a number of other situations that I think could really be avoided as we continue to come up together and come together as a system. I think that, I guess one of the last kind of thoughts that comes to me, I know I've said quite a few things, is that we're all here talking about youth homelessness and homelessness prevention, but really each and every young person that we're serving deserves to receive the support in their lives in the context where they need it, ideally at a time before they've lost their housing. And when we think of young people transitioning out of care in particular, I think this is especially true because this is a population of young people who have been parented by the state. In effect, they've been often criminalized because their lives are governed by legislation and by policy directives. And I think of the fact that a young person actually said to me, well, normal teenagers, do stupid things, or they go through what we would call like the natural kind of learning curve of adolescence. And if you have a family where you feel safe, you can have natural consequences, or you can have teachable moments between parents and children or grandparents and children and not have it be the end of the world. And for young people that are in care, if they happen to have anything go wrong, if they miss their 10 p.m. curfew, that could be the difference between them having a conversation and a teachable moment with a loving parent or being on the road to a criminal record because of a system that was never designed to be a parent in the first place. So I was just thinking about what Edgar was saying too, and feeling like when we talk about homelessness, that's a housing condition. Yes, it's a human right, but that is not in any way a self-definition. And I know we talk about homelessness, and that is not to in any way take away from anyone else's wishes of how they wish to define themselves or that situation. But I think we often talk about homeless people or people experiencing homelessness as if that's a part of how they've constructed who they are, or as if that was a wish that they ever had. And I think that we need to bring our humanity back into this work and really remember who we are as people and why we're all here together. And as just a final thought, my colleague Eric Wexler is our new manager of the Free to Be program, the Housing First for Youth Leaving Care initiative that we're launching, which is a part of the Making the Shift project as well. And he often talks about how, yes, when we talk about housing first, there must be a safe, appropriate place for young people to live on that continuum of housing. But when we talk about the difference between a house and a home, we're talking about relationships. We're understanding that you can have somewhere to live, and if you don't have people in your life that are supporting you, if you're not connected to friends or to natural supports, whoever your family is, that's what our youth advisors call it. If you don't have some kind of a family in your life to support you when things are tough, then you may still be without that home. And I think of Jesse Thistle's work, and I know we'll have the opportunity to hear from him on Thursday. So let's just remember as we talk about, finding ways to increase housing and work to prevent homelessness for young people, that building a home isn't just finding housing, it's also ensuring that people have real connection in their lives and that it's not left up to chance or to some system. Thank you.
Cool. So we are last minute stand-ins, but we are gonna share with you some of our experience over the last 2 years with Away Home in doing some research, particularly with populations that are experiencing more marginalization. So just as a bit of background, Jackie, actually, myself and Mike, our first year had put together a fairly extensive consultation within the city, generally with young people who experience homelessness. We had, I think, about 70 youth that we were able to engage either through focus groups or personal interviews, as well as I think about 50 staff members, and yeah, something in that realm. And so we ended up having kind of a set of findings and recommendations that came out of this. We called it the Opportunity Project, telling a news story about youth homelessness in Ottawa. And I think Edgar actually wrote the intro with Corinne, who is also somewhere in this room or building somewhere. And so very much about trying to frame how Edgar had said that too, we miss out on potential when we miss out on young people being a part of our community and not having housing. And so what we really noticed after the first year, though, is that we had very little understanding or recognition of particular populations who experience higher rates of homelessness, but were quite hidden in a lot of ways and in our attempts at research and outreach. Our process was fairly comprehensive, so we also were somewhat baffled, I guess. Maybe we shouldn't have been, but really we're not able to engage with kind of 3 core groups. Certainly Indigenous young people, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis really struggled to find those who were interested in speaking to us through formal service provision. And we also noticed a fair number of newcomer youth being named by service providers, not by their name, but just named that, we've seen a real increase in newcomer youth coming to our services, but we weren't engaging very well with them either. We didn't succeed at that. And then I think that third group of young people who are LGBTQ2S. And so as we kind of set out on a second year, Jackie was a rock star and managed to find us some funding through MyTax and was able to get a second round of funding to be able to try again and specifically work and try and find more information and speak to youth who are from these particular subpopulations and explore what particularly led to your experience of homelessness. What is that like in general? What is helpful? What is not helpful? And so we kind of at that point embarked and asked local experts who specialized in these particular areas, and their feedback was hire people who identify as these particular identities. And we're like, okay, that's great. How do we do that? And then we just started talking to people and engaging, and we hired 4 young people. And all of this was kind of through service providers who were providing ongoing feedback and support, getting the word out, had particular recommendations for folks. And then we hired 4 youth in the beginning. And I'm going to let Charlotte take it from here.
Yeah, so that's how I became involved through Professor Kennelly. She knew I had lived experience, so she hired me as a research liaison, which is great because of the 4, there used to be 4, then there was 3, but basically the research team, the liaisons, we all became really solid, really good friends, and now we have our even better network, I think, because definitely our homelessness, I'm speaking for myself, but I think that it affects everyone throughout their whole lives. So we're still feeling the effects of our homelessness, and to have each other and to be a part of this research was really great. I feel like when I tell anything about my story, I also get to incorporate into it stories of people I know, especially people who have passed away. So it's really great to I feel like I'm honoring their memory by telling those stories and bringing awareness of that. And I urge you all to like visit the Spirit Flag Memorial, and to, if you know somebody, to put a name on the wall. And if you don't, to pick one of the names from the list to make one, because I think it's so important to remember all those youth and individuals, because all those deaths, I see it as preventable, and I see it as a failure of society. And it's really interesting because being part of this research too, like we really were treated as equals. I mean, now I'm a university student, but I still always feel as if I'm sort of not equal to other people who, you know, maybe were never homeless or were never addicted to drugs. And Professor Kennelly really treated us like as if we were equals, as if we were all working on this project equally, and it was a really great experience. And I think there should be more things like that, opportunities for youth to get involved and to have their voices heard. I use my friends within my network to get as participants for the interviews, but a lot of the questions I asked them and the things we talked about during the interviews were things we never talked about before, but it opened my eyes to certain things. One of the participants I used, we met in jail, and as they were talking to me, I was noticing very similar things from our past, you know, parents who kicked us out, who weren't supportive, slipping into drug use, sex work, things like that. And I realized it's not a coincidence that we experience these things when we're younger, and then we meet in jail 5 years later. And there's so many similar stories like that, you know, and you see somebody on the street, and, you know, or somebody who has a criminal record, and you think, oh, Jesus, you know, like, what am I dealing with here? Well, you're dealing with somebody like yourself. Like, literally anybody can become homeless or a drug addict, and I think that's what people need to realize. Some things from the research, it's cool because Sydney, I think, in her research mentions similar issues that we found in Professor Kennelly's research and Katie's research. I don't know who the research belongs to, but all of our research, you know, and also to add on to the things that she pointed out, like points of failure for the youth where they interacted with services and the services didn't do everything they could for them. And even things like high schools were aware that the youths were struggling, and oftentimes and not always, but a lot of times they tried to sweep them under the rug. Even I had one participant who said that their high school graduated them with credits unfinished and just signed them off just to get them out of the high school, just so that they didn't have to continue to deal with them. This person was like, I guess it was a well-to-do high school, so they definitely didn't want anything to do with that. Even for me, my high school, they used to give me 2 food tickets a week to use the cafeteria. Like, I'm there for 5 days, you know, like, and they always treated me as if I was, you know, trying to screw the system or something, and really I wasn't. Guidance counselors treating kids as if it's their own fault that they've been kicked out, not being able to trust your guidance counselor. I've had guidance counselor tell me that I was, you know, manipulative, and that really hurt. Attention seeking is another one, you know, and really I wasn't. I was just completely felt out of control, and I needed help. And being discharged, another problem from the research, people getting discharged from hospital or getting released from prison or the courthouse, not having anywhere to go. And like, you're dealing with, like, I think maybe these services, they don't see the people they're dealing with as youth, because maybe they're 21 or 22 or 23 and they see them as adults. But really, like, if, a lot of these people might have been homeless since they were 15. They might have never, how can you treat them as if they're a fully functioning adult when they're clearly not, right? And you had a chance to help them, and you sent them out without shoelaces. You released them from the courthouse without a winter coat, without proper winter shoes, with nowhere to go. And then you're going to continue to stigmatize them for that, and then they get trapped in that cycle. And I think even of the services that are doing a really good job, I think Edgar mentioned, or somebody mentioned, they need to be more connected too, because like, you might help me with one thing, OW might give me a rent check, but I need so much more than that to be able to get, or I did need that, so much more than that to get to where I am today. And I'm just lucky that I am here today. And like so many of my friends and so many people are still experiencing homelessness. And they just, you know, it's just circumstance. It's not their fault, you know. I'm lucky. And it's not that they're not trying hard enough. It's that
we're not all doing enough to get them out of that position. And and just thanks to Professor Kennelly for letting me be involved in this, and it means so much to me.
Everyone. Oops. Oh. Okay, everything's just kind of falling apart. Okay, is it yours? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, first of all, for joining us this afternoon on the last panel of a very full day. It's great to see so many people here. It's really an honor to be part of such a powerful panel, so thank you to all of my fellow panelists. So I'm going to spend the last portion of the panel talking about LGBTQ2S youth homelessness and the barriers and challenges that this population of young people often face when trying to access support services and housing programs. I'm also going to talk about some of the ways that we could more effectively capture, identify, and address this issue for research and policy and practice purposes. So I'm going to start off with some background information to provide some context on LGBTQ2S youth homelessness in Canada, including some of the challenges and barriers that queer and trans youth often experience. And then I'm going to talk about some of the solutions, and I'll share some thoughts on how to move forward in a more effective and inclusive way. I'd like to just also mention that the lens in which I approach my work is I'm a queer and trans researcher, and so that is the lens in which I see the world and in which I approach my work. Having been a young person, a young queer person who faced ongoing oppression throughout most of my life, that really has helped informed a lot of the work that I do. Okay, so I'm going to start off with some background information here, and I apologize if this is old information for some of you. So we've known for well over 2 decades now that LGBTQ2S youth are overrepresented in the youth homeless population, making up approximately 25 to 40% of youth experiencing homelessness. And we also know that identity-based family conflict resulting from a young person coming out as queer or trans is a major contributing factor to youth homelessness, and it's the most frequently cited cause of homelessness for queer and trans youth. As I'm sure many of you also already know, additional factors include exiting public systems such as child welfare, juvenile justice system into homelessness, unstable and insufficient employment, and poverty and racism. And the experience of homelessness is quite different for young people who identify as queer and trans versus heterosexual and cisgender youth. So when I say cisgender, I'm referring to people whose gender identity aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So for example, someone who was assigned female at birth, who goes through life identifying as a woman, would be a cisgender woman. Whereas a transgender woman would be someone who was assigned male at birth who identifies as a woman. I just mentioned that just to make sure we're all on the same page. So queer and trans youth tend to become homeless at younger ages and experience homelessness for longer episodes compared to cisgender and heterosexual youth. They also experience an increased risk of mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, suicide, substance use, and physical and sexual exploitation. Once homeless, LGBTQ2S youth often continue to face discrimination, rejection, and violence in the systems that are meant to help and support all youth. Housing, employment, healthcare, and social services are often not constructed for nor trained appropriately to meet the specific needs of LGBTQ2S youth who have experienced multiple stigmas related to racism, transphobia, and homophobia. And these difficulties are often magnified, especially so for trans and gender-expansive youth of color who navigate systems with multiple marginalized identities. Young trans women of color frequently experience severe marginalization in shelters, in housing programs, and social services, based on their gender identity, race, sexual orientation, class, and age. For all of these reasons, it's absolutely fundamental that as researchers, policymakers, and service providers, that we approach our work using an intersectional lens and an understanding that young people's experiences are based on multiple identities that can be linked to more than one form of oppression and discrimination. So over the years, my research has looked closely at different ways that LGBTQ2S youth are erased and made invisible in institutional settings, such as shelters and housing programs and the healthcare system. Institutional rules and policies often don't consider or include queer and trans identities, especially trans identities. And there continues to be this expectation in the shelter system and in pretty much all systems, as well as in research and government surveys, that every person is going to fit into the gender binary. And this makes it very difficult for queer and trans individuals to navigate these systems and these services and complete surveys and questionnaires. I've worked with many LGBTQ2S youth and young adults over the years who report being unable to bring their full authentic selves to programs and shelters, and describe feeling forced into categories that they don't identify with. And this happens in many different ways when a young person enters a service. I've also talked to countless service providers over the years who say, we don't have any queer or trans youth residents in our program. And then when I've asked them if I could see their intake forms, I noticed that they only provide the option for people to identify as male or female, and sometimes they tag on the term other. So they don't actually even collect LGBTQ2S inclusive data oftentimes. So then, of course, it's very easy to say that we don't actually serve queer and trans youth. So the questions that we ask matter. Not only can these questions help collect important data, but they can also help people feel welcome, and they can help people feel safe, but they can also do quite the opposite. Doing ethical research and work involves asking the right questions and ensuring that we ask inclusive questions that capture people's actual identities. We need better data to help us talk about and address homelessness among the queer and trans population, youth and young adults. We need improved data collection to help inform the scope of the problem across the country, which we still don't fully understand, especially when it comes to more rural and remote communities in Canada. So on the screen, I've provided an example of some inclusive sexual and gender identity questions, which could be included on intake forms, for data collection purposes, for research, or for point-in-time counts and street needs assessments. And part of shifting towards an inclusive intake process also involves asking people what name and what pronoun they go by, because people's identities don't always align with their government ID, of course. Asking LGBTQ2S inclusive questions, such as these ones, also allows us to more effectively capture, identify, and address the issue of LGBTQ youth homelessness in services and in research. However, it's not enough for us to just throw in a couple of new questions on our forms. In order for us to collect accurate data, program staff and those who are conducting surveys or pit counts, street needs assessments, they also require adequate training to ask these types of questions in a sensitive manner, and also to ensure that it's understood that every single person completing these surveys, answering these questions, have to be asked the exact same questions. And we can't just ask these additional questions to the people who we might perceive as LGBTQ to us, because there's no way of knowing how a person identifies unless we ask them. And even when people do self-identify as LGBTQ, accurate prevalence rates are also dependent on data management systems at the community and national levels having been designed to capture this type of data and to integrate this type of data as well. And I have found that this is actually one of the biggest barriers. So we have to be mindful of the various reasons as well that queer and trans youth might not feel safe coming out. They may not feel safe accessing services, so they won't have a chance to even answer these questions. And they may be part of the hidden homeless population, which is a significant concern for this population of young people, especially for those who are living in more rural and remote communities. And we also need to find better ways of reaching those people and including their perspectives and their experiences in the data that we do collect. And we have to remember that programs are not and should not be the only solution. Programs often lack a targeted, specialized response to LGBTQ residents who we know face a unique set of challenges, both before and during their experiences of homelessness, as well as when attempting to exit homelessness. And this includes the absence of non-discrimination policies that are inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity, which perpetuates the lack of access to homelessness intervention programs for LGBTQ individuals. Many program staff may not be knowledgeable about the experiences of trans people, and as a result, they may feel unable to work with trans folks in an affirming manner. Most funded programs tend to focus on the emergency response, which we know, of course, is absolutely necessary. We need that. But there also needs to be more emphasis on prevention, which we heard about today as well, and longer-term solutions, and of course, targeted strategies as well. There's no one solution to any of these problems that we've been discussing on the panel, but there are different ways that shelters and housing programs can address some of these problems. So we know that LGBTQ2S youth homelessness requires a specialized response. That's clear. We know that from previous research. And a response that includes population-specific housing programs, which continue to be quite successful in meeting the needs of this population. So for example, YMCA Sprott House, which was Canada's first comprehensive LGBTQ2S youth transitional housing program, opened 2 years ago in Toronto. Sprott House is a 25-bed program which houses youth between 16 and 24 years old for up to 2 years. And in addition to specialized housing and drop-in programs, it is fundamental that policymakers and government also create strategies and initiatives that focus less, as I said, on the emergency response and less on reacting to the problem, and that we spend more time focusing on longer-term solutions that will actually help prevent young people from becoming homeless in the first place, especially for queer and trans youth, which can be quite difficult because oftentimes it may be actually not possible to prevent them from becoming homeless. So we need to be creative in our solutions. These types of solutions and strategies involve also working with the school system and families and providing resources and education so that families and schools and anyone really in a young person's life is prepared to support them when they do come out as opposed to reject them, which is so often the case. And oftentimes people do want to do better, I have found. They want to support their youth, but they may not have the resources and they may not have the tools to help them do so. So we need to find ways to provide them with the appropriate tools, which also include mandatory competency training, LGBTQ competency training, which is absolutely essential, and more programs are creating ways to make this type of training mandatory and ongoing. So a lot of what I've been talking about is drawn from a book that I recently co-edited with my colleague Jema Shelton in New York. And the book is Where Am I Going to Go? Intersectional Approaches to Ending LGBTQ Youth Homelessness in Canada and the US. It features 53 amazing contributors in 11 chapters. There are case studies written by different service providers throughout Canada and the US, and youth voices throughout the book as well. It's available for free download on the Homeless Hub website, or it could also be purchased at the York University bookstore. And I'm just going to end off with a quote. This quote is from a young person who I recently interviewed at Sprott House. And this quote really, to me, illustrates the importance of these types of programs. There's a community in the house. It's almost like a family. We stick up for each other. It's like I moved out of my mom's home into a better home with family that understand me, with people that don't disrespect me or make me feel horrible for the person that I am. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. I was thinking just, thank you for your stories and your knowledge, and I think they're one and the same, but thank you to all of you. I'm mindful of the time, and it's the end of the day, so with the panel's permission, I'm actually going to just open this up right away and see if there's anyone that has a question or a reaction or a comment, an intervention that you'd like to bring into this discussion. There's a mic in the center, and that's just there to help us ensure that we hear one another. One of the things that I'm walking away with, and this is to let you continue to build your ideas here. I think one of the things that my takeaway from this panel is that there's an incredible amount of strength here. There's strength on this panel. I think each panelist shared stories with us, some that are more personal or differently personal, but I want to draw from that strength. And I think that it does represent the strength that's in this room, which is amazing, because what we've heard is that we've got a lot of work to do. And we know that those margins in many cases are still pretty wide, and the gaps are there. But we do have strength in this room, and we're in this together. We're coming up together. And I think we can go away with that. So it's maybe been a long day, but we've got a lot to draw from. And I thought you were going to the mic. That's okay. Yeah, go for it.
This is to Alex, basically. You made really passing reference that we didn't understand LGBTQ in rural communities very much. In my limited research, basically rural and gay don't go together. The kids basically say disappear, go urban, stay there. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. There's really limited research, especially in Canada, on LGBTQ2S youth experience in rural communities, not just homelessness, but just in general. Like, I've talked to a lot of trans youth who have come out in rural communities and have felt very, very isolated, didn't really have any resources or any programs available to them, and were really struggling and have turned to online supports. So there's a lot of groups online, a lot of forums that young people have created for one another, and that seems to be sort of where things are headed. But I mean, there's so much we don't know about this issue, and that's all I could really say is that this is an area that we have to explore. Yeah.
But no ideas about how to do it.
About how we do it.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean from a research perspective?
Well, because they say it's not safe to speak, and if we need to hear from them in order to know how to understand it and therefore how to deal with it, how to be helpful.
Who says it's not safe to speak?
The kids, the young people.
Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes perhaps I can understand that maybe they don't feel safe speaking to the programs that do exist or the workers that they are currently working with, but sometimes having an outsider come in to collect data or to conduct focus groups or interviews, they may feel safer, especially if it's somebody who is queer or trans and out. In my experience, that's what I have found. So finding ways to perhaps collaborate with researchers who are in those positions, who are ready to collect data and conduct research.
In the rural areas. Good.
Yes.
Yep. Are you hearing me?
So talk to me after.
Thank you. I think one of the things that's going to be really helpful, and Alex's research and input has been a big part of this, is as the communities across the country roll out new point-in-time counts and point prevalence counts and different ways of enumeration with some really explicit, that's a funny word, but really helpful and clear wording around some of those questions. And I think the more that we can demonstrate that those communities exist in rural communities as well as anywhere, the more that we'll be able to do with that as well. So thank you.
Sorry, can I just add one thing, actually?
For sure.
So the HPS point-in-time count 2018, I am doing some work with them, and I have helped them develop 2 new questions around gender identity and sexual orientation. So those questions will be included, and they will be administered in over 60 communities across the country. So that will help hopefully provide a clearer picture.
That's great. Go ahead.
Thank you for coming. I hear a lot of emphasis on research, but is there like any tangible steps? Like whenever I hear panels speak, I haven't heard the panels before, it's constantly like nouns and verbs and adjectives and describing things and research, but I don't really hear a lot of verbs. So I don't know what people do or what I could do. I just leave feeling like, okay, there's a problem, and I feel very happy that I'm somewhat informed about it, but then I feel like, what do I do next? And I become very confused. So I guess that's the question. Like, yeah, where are the verbs? Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I don't know. Anyone want to? It's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, really great question. And I'm a doer, so I like that question a lot. I think what was actually positive about some of the research we found specifically on LGBTQ2S youth is that there had been a bit of a shift in the sector over 10 years. From people who had experienced homelessness probably about 10, 15 years ago, and it was pretty rough. And when we would talk to younger youth, they would say actually it was more responsive and more respectful, and people understood. Workers were just more in tune with what I was going through, and more culturally, I would say culturally, but safe responses. And a lot of that they attributed to education of workers. And so I think what Alex was saying just about that safety training is such a key piece, but for all of these particular subpopulations as well. So we heard that loud and clear as well for Indigenous people, and just a real need to have every mainstream agency be well trained in cultural safety training. Tiffany actually brought the idea, sitting in the front row there, she brought the idea that what if we did smudging as part of the work when we actually do interviews with Indigenous kids if they want to. And so that became a part of it. And I think her being a part of the process helped us open our eyes to those sorts of things that are not small at all, but really, really tangible pieces that start to create a message for youth that this is a safe place and that we're trying to learn. So I think that is one big thing that we can all be working towards in these communities.
Are you asking what you can personally do to help?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying?
Well, everybody
Yeah, I think even at just the bare minimum level, what you can take away from this conference is when you talk about homelessness, if you talk about it, and you should talk about it in a positive light, talk about it in ways of helping, not victim blaming, stuff like that. And definitely every time you have spare change, this is just my personal opinion, and you're walking past somebody who's panhandling, give them your change, give them whatever you have, and be nice to them. And if every time you don't have change, just acknowledge their existence and tell them to have a good day or whatever.
Can I ask another one, since nobody else is asking?
Go for it.
So since you mentioned to talk about it, I noticed there's always an emphasis that there has to be people with lived experiences, and I think that takes away from people's help, because everything is always it seems to be a barrier. You either have lived experiences, or we want to have nothing to do with you, either on the research level or either on just simply participating, because we prefer people that have lived experiences. So do you think that takes away from having the conversation with other people that might not otherwise be involved in this?
Yeah, man, I think that lived experience gets really glorified, as maybe it should, I don't know, but I think that there's tons of people out there who can help, and their opinions and their everything about their contributions are just as valuable as somebody who has lived experience, and both perspectives are very valuable. So yeah, and I definitely think you raise a good point. I think it's an obstacle for maybe people don't feel that they can even have the right to speak on a subject because they haven't experienced it, and I don't agree with that at all. And I like to hear what everyone has to think on it, and especially from the perspective of never having lived it. What do you think, and how do you think what is the solution? Because I think a lot of what the solution is going to be at the end of the day isn't just between service providers and youth, but it's about public opinion and the whole public. So we need to involve everyone, and everyone needs to feel that they're being listened to and respected, so that we can all be a happy, peaceful society, right?
Is it call to action? It's awesome.
That was,
yeah.
I'm almost nervous to follow that because I agree with everything that she just said. I just wanted to add that I think it's really, I 100% agree, we have to have conversations with as many people as possible. And to do so coming from a place of mindfulness about it, and being aware of who you are and what your privilege might be or what your context might be, and to bring that to those conversations. And I feel like in my own work, I've had a lot of opportunities to work with lots of different communities. And when I ask my friends belonging to those communities, how can I interact with with this group in a good way, or how should I show up? They say, well, what you're doing, to ask questions, to acknowledge your ignorance, to talk about how you don't know what someone else has been through, but that you care and that you want to know what you could do. The fact that you ask that question opens up the space to then have a conversation about some of the things that are maybe harder to talk about when you don't have, like for myself, if I don't have a lived experience of homelessness, to recognize that and to still be able to move forward, I think goes a long way.
Thank you. Maybe we've got time for another, if there's anyone else with something on your mind.
I can't be the only one.
That's right.
Or the second one. It's got to be more than that.
Any of our panelists have a question for each other?
To the point earlier, what are we doing? I think Katie, I know I keep calling your name, but I think you are doing it in the right way, in the sense that we are doing it in a creative way. And I think with this kind of problem, it's been addressed for several years, and people have been trying to fix this problem in all kinds of worlds and cities. And I think the only way to fix this is to come up with creative ways. And one of the creative things that Katie has started doing is approaching board members and getting them to invest in and give their expertise, and actually getting them to sign up and see what we're doing with this kind of process. So there needs to be a community involvement for sure, and everyone can get involved in a community level. But once again, this just goes back to my previous point. This is something that's destructive to the community at large, and it's something that everyone should really get involved in. I remember meeting a person, a girl who was pregnant at the time when I met her, and she was in a shelter. And I just remember looking at her and being like, you know, if she doesn't get the proper support and care, this is going to be passed on from 2 generations, you know? So this is just something that can spiral out of control very quickly.
Great. I want to thank all of you for being here with us till the end of today. I want to thank our panel, and I'm going to say Charlotte and Katie in particular for jumping in and sharing as you did, and for Edgar, Sydney, and Alex. Thanks to each of you for sharing your knowledge with us. We all bring different expertise, and I think that was really clear again this afternoon. So I think this ends day 1 of coming up together. I'm not seeing any other announcements, so we meet back here tomorrow morning at 9. Have a wonderful Ottawa evening.